Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the edge of a vast, silent forest. The air is cool, the birds are singing, and the path ahead is clear. This represents your life in its natural state, full of potential, beauty, and quiet opportunity. But as you take your first step, a whisper starts in the back of your mind. It's faint at first, a mere vibration of doubt. What if there are wolves in the shadows? What if I trip and break my leg? Did I lock the front door? Everyone probably thinks I'm a fool for coming here alone. Suddenly, the forest isn't beautiful anymore. It's a labyrinth of threats. You haven't even moved 10 feet, yet your heart is racing, your palms are sweaty, and you are exhausted. This is the invisible cage. It is a prison where the bars are made of what-ifs, and the floor is paved with should-haves. Unlike a physical prison, you carry this one with you everywhere you go. You take it to work, you bring it to the dinner table, and you lie down with it at night. Overthinking is not just thinking a lot. It is a destructive habit where your mind becomes a broken record, playing the same stressful scenarios on loop until the music becomes a scream. It is a thief of sleep, the killer of creativity, and the architect of unnecessary suffering. To understand why we suffer, we must first look at the biological machinery upstairs. Your brain is the most sophisticated biological computer in existence, yet it is running on software that is 200,000 years old. In the Pleistocene era, overthinking was a survival trait. If you sat by a watering hole and spent an hour analyzing the specific way the tall grass was swaying, you might notice the slight, unnatural twitch that signaled a hiding predator. The ancestors who overanalyzed stayed alive. The ones who were chill and ignored the rustle in the grass were eaten. We are the descendants of the paranoid. However, the world has changed faster than our DNA. In the modern age, we don't have saber-toothed tigers stalking us through the suburbs. Instead, we have passive-aggressive emails from supervisors, the terrifying silence of a partner who hasn't texted back, and the crushing weight of social media comparisons. Our brains cannot tell the difference between a physical predator and a social one. When you worry about a mortgage payment or a mistake you made in a presentation, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires exactly as if you were being hunted. It floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline, prepping you for a fight that never comes. This creates a state of chronic hypervigilance. Because there is no physical enemy to fight or flee from, the energy has nowhere to go. It turns inward. It begins to eat at your confidence, your physical health, and your peace of mind. You begin to overanalyze every word spoken to you, searching for hidden insults. You replay past mistakes with a magnifying glass, convinced that if you just look closely enough, you can change the outcome of a day that has already passed. This is the ultimate paradox of the overthinker. We believe that by thinking more, we're solving the problem, when in fact, the thinking is the problem. The weight of this mental load is staggering. Think of your mind like a browser with 50 tabs open. Some are playing music you can't turn off. Others are loading high-definition videos of your worst embarrassments. And one is constantly refreshing a to-do list that never ends. No wonder you feel drained. No wonder you feel like you're falling behind, even when you're working harder than everyone else. Your RAM, your mental processing power, is being sucked dry by background tasks that serve no purpose other than to keep you in a state of high vibration anxiety. In this comprehensive audiobook experience, we are going to do more than just acknowledge the problem. We are going to perform a system reset. Nick Trenton's work is not a collection of positive vibes or empty platitudes. It is a tactical manual for reclaiming your cognitive sovereignty. We are going to look at the science of the stress response, the psychology of cognitive distortions, and the practical, battle-tested techniques used by top performers to stay calm under pressure. You might feel right now that this is just who you are. You might think, I've always been a worrier. It's in my DNA. I am here to tell you that you are wrong. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, proves that you can unlearn the habit of anxiety. Just as a path through the woods becomes deeper and easier to follow the more you walk it, the worry path in your brain has become a deep trench. But we can grow grass over that trench. We can carve out a new path, one of presence, one of action, and one of profound, unshakable calm. As we move through the following chapters, I want you to view yourself not as a victim of your thoughts, but as an observer of them. You are the sky. The thoughts are just clouds. Some are white and fluffy. Some are dark and stormy. But no matter how violent the storm, the sky remains. It is vast, it is silent, and it is untouched. By the end of this journey, you will not only have the tools to silence the noise, but you will have rediscovered the silence that was always there, waiting for you beneath the chatter. Take a deep breath. Release the tension in your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. You've spent years fighting a war inside your head. It is time to sign the peace treaty. It is time to stop overthinking and start living. Let us begin to walk out of the forest and into the light. Have you ever laid in bed at 3 a.m., the world outside bathed in a silent, silver moonlight, while inside your skull a riot is taking place? You are staring at the ceiling, and your mind is a projector running a high-definition highlight reel of your most cringeworthy moments from a decade ago. You analyze the specific cadence of your voice, the exact millisecond of a pause in a conversation, and the perceived judgment in the eyes of a person who has likely forgotten you even exist. Why does a human brain, the most sophisticated and powerful biological computer in existence, choose to spend its precious processing power on something so utterly useless? Why are we wired to sabotage our own peace? The core lesson to stop the cycle: we must first understand the machinery. Nick Trenton posits a fundamental truth that most people ignore. Overthinking is not a personality flaw. It is a survival mechanism that has lost its way. We are the survivors of ancestors who were perpetually anxious. In the harsh environment of the Pleistocene, a relaxed human was often a dead human. If our ancestors heard a rustle in the long grass and thought, "It's probably just the wind," they didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. The ones who thought, "It's a leopard and it's going to eat my family," were the ones who survived. We have inherited the worry gene. In the modern brain, this manifests as a tug-of-war between two specific regions, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is your internal smoke detector. It is ancient, fast, and loud. Its only job is to detect threats. When it perceives a danger, be it a looming credit card bill or a critical comment from a coworker, it sends an SOS signal to the rest of your body. It triggers a fight or flight response, flooding your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, your breathing shallows, and your focus narrows. The problem is that the amygdala cannot distinguish between a physical threat to your life and a psychological threat to your ego. It treats a bad vibe in a meeting with the same biological intensity as a predator stalking you through the woods. Once the amygdala is fired up, it effectively hijacks the prefrontal cortex, the rational, logical part of your brain. This is why, when you are in the middle of an overthinking spiral, just calming down feels physically impossible. Your logical brain has been sidelined by your survival brain. Trenton categorizes this mental noise into two distinct poisonous streams: rumination and future-focused worry. Rumination is the act of chewing on the past. Like a cow chewing cud, we bring up old memories and reprocess them over and over, hoping that somehow, through sheer mental force, we can change an outcome that is already etched in history. Future-focused worry is the opposite. It is the attempt to live in a future that hasn't happened yet. We create mental simulations of every possible catastrophe, believing that if we can just predict the pain, we can prevent it. This is the illusion of control. We think thinking is doing. We think that if we worry enough about the bridge failing, the bridge will somehow stay standing. Real-world application. The corporate spiral. Consider the case of Sarah, a highly successful project manager. Sarah receives a brief, forward email from her director at 4:45 p.m. on a Friday. "Let's chat on Monday." To a mind at peace, this is a simple calendar invitation. To Sarah's overthinking mind, this is a death warrant. By 5 p.m., she is convinced she is being fired. By 7 p.m., she has updated her resume. By Saturday morning, she is researching the cost of living in a cheaper city because she assumes she will be homeless. She spends her entire weekend in a state of high vibration panic, unable to play with her children or enjoy a meal. When Monday morning finally arrives, the director tells her, "I just wanted to see if you'd be interested in leading the new expansion project." Sarah's overthinking didn't prepare her. It only robbed her of 48 hours of her life that she will never get back. Real-world application. the social echo, then there's David, who attends a small gathering of friends. During dinner, he makes a joke that doesn't quite land. There's a 2-second silence before the conversation moves on. For the next week, David is trapped in a social echo. He replays those 2 seconds of silence on a loop. He convinces himself that his friends find him arrogant, or worse, boring. He begins to read between the lines of their subsequent text messages, looking for signs of coldness. He begins to withdraw, declining future invitations to protect himself from further humiliation. David is reacting to a version of reality that exists only within the confines of his own skull. He has allowed a 2-second silence to dictate his social identity. The deep dive. Breaking the neural loops. Why is this habit so hard to break? The answer lies in long-term potentiation, LTP. In simple terms, neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you allow yourself to spiral into a WADA scenario, you are strengthening the neural pathway for that specific thought pattern. You are digging a trench in your brain. The more you walk that path, the deeper the trench becomes, until eventually your thoughts fall into it automatically. Overthinking becomes your default setting. However, the miracle of the human brain is neuroplasticity. Just as you can dig a trench, you can fill it back in. The first step to rewiring your brain is the development of metacognitive awareness, the ability to think about what you are thinking. Most people are fused with their thoughts. They believe that because they had a thought, it must be true. If they think, I am a failure, they accept it as a factual observation reality, like saying the sky is blue. To stop overthinking, you must learn to defuse. You must move from saying, I am a failure, to saying, I am having the thought that I am a failure. This tiny linguistic shift creates a space, a gap between you and the emotion. In that gap lies your freedom. You start to see your thoughts not as objective truths, but as mental events that are often inaccurate, biased, and driven by an outdated survival instinct. We must also address the dopamine trap of overthinking. Believe it or not, your brain gets a twisted sort of reward from worrying. Because worrying feels like working on a problem, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine for the effort. You feel a sense of false productivity. This is why overthinking is so addictive. It gives you the sensation of movement without the progress of a single step. We must break this addiction by replacing mental analysis with physical grounding. We'll explore the 5-4-3-2-1 technique and the Eisenhower matrix. But for now, the work is purely internal. You must begin to audit your own mind. When a thought enters your head, ask it for its credentials. Is this thought based on evidence? Is it helpful? Is it moving me toward a solution? Or is it just spinning the wheels? You are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. You are the mountain, and the thoughts are just the weather. The weather may be violent, the wind may howl, and the snow may blind, but the mountain remains. It is unshakable. It is grounded. It is still. This chapter is your invitation to stop being the storm and start being the mountain. As we transition into the tactical methods of stress management, remember that the goal isn't to stop thinking. That's impossible. The goal is to stop letting your thoughts run the show. It is time to take the steering wheel back from your amygdala and put your rational self in the driver's seat. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're caught in a mental whirlpool. It starts with a single thought, perhaps a deadline you missed or a sharp remark from a friend. Before you know it, the water is spinning faster. Your mind begins to drag in every other insecurity you've ever had. You aren't just worried about the deadline. You're worried about your career, your intelligence, and your future. The walls of your room seem to vanish as you are sucked into the dark center of the what if. You are no longer in the present. You are a ghost haunting a future that hasn't happened yet. How do you stop the spinning? How do you reach out and grab the edge of the pool? The answer isn't in your head. It's in your hands, your eyes, and your breath. The core lesson Nick Trenton introduces the 5-4-3-2-1 technique as the emergency brake for the human brain. To understand why it works, we have to look at how the brain processes information. When you are overthinking, your brain is stuck in the default mode network, DMN. This is the part of the brain responsible for self-reflection, ruminating on the past, and projecting into the future. It is the internal world. Grounding works by forcefully shifting your brain's activity from the DMN to the task positive network, TPN. The TPN is the external world. It is a part of your brain that processes sensory data and handles immediate tasks. The brain finds it physically difficult to be fully engaged in both networks at once. By focusing intensely on your physical senses, you starve the overthinking loop of the energy it needs to continue. You aren't ignoring your anxiety. You are literally changing the channel of your consciousness. The 5-4-3-2-1 breakdown. 5 things you see. Look for small details. The texture of the carpet, the way light reflects off a window, the specific shade of green on a leaf. 4 things you can touch. The coldness of a desk, the weight of your shoes, the fabric of your shirt. Focus on the pressure and temperature. 3 things you hear. The hum of a refrigerator, distant traffic, the sound of your own breathing. 2 things you can smell. The faint scent of coffee, the smell of the air, or even the scent of your own skin. 1 thing you can taste. The lingering taste of mint, or simply the sensation of your tongue against the roof of your mouth. The panic in the presentation. Let's look at Marcus, an analyst who has to present a high-stakes report to the board of directors. As he stands at the front of the room, he notices one director looking at his watch. Instantly, Marcus's brain enters a spiral. He's bored. I'm failing. They're going to pass on the project. I'm going to lose my bonus. His throat tightens. He begins to stutter. Instead of trying to think his way out of the panic, which would only add more thoughts to the fire, Marcus uses the 5-4-3-2-1 method. He looks at the grain of the wooden podium. 1. The blue ink in his pen. 2. The glare on his laptop screen. 3. The speck of dust on his sleeve. 4. And the red exit sign. 5. He feels the hard floor beneath his feet. Within 30 seconds, the internal noise drops by 50%. He has successfully re-anchored himself in a room. He isn't fighting the board. He is simply standing in a room, speaking words. The threat is gone because he returned to the now. The insomniacs loop consider Elena, who struggles with sleep. Every night, the silence of her bedroom becomes a vacuum that sucks in every worry from her day. She tries to force herself to sleep, which only makes her more alert. She begins to use grounding. She feels a specific weight of the duvet on her toes. She listens to the rhythmic ticking of a clock in the hallway. By engaging her senses, she signals to her nervous system that she is safe. The amygdala, realizing there is no physical threat in the room, finally powers down, allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to take over. The deep dive, the science of sensory processing. We need to understand the thalamus. The thalamus is a grand central station of your brain. Every piece of sensory information except smell passes through the thalamus before it reaches the rest of your brain. When you are overthinking, your internal thoughts are overwhelming the thalamus. By deliberately seeking out 5 visual inputs and 4 tactile inputs, you are flooding the thalamus with external data. This forces the brain to prioritize the immediate environment over the abstract thought loops of the prefrontal cortex. It's a biological override. Furthermore, this technique engages the vagus nerve, the longest nerve of the autonomic nervous system. When you focus on your senses, your breathing naturally slows down. This vagal tone sends a message to your heart to slow its beat and to your adrenal glands to stop pumping cortisol. In Trenton's philosophy, grounding is not a cure, but it is a first aid kit. You cannot solve a complex life problem while your brain is in a state of high vibration panic. Grounding brings you back to a baseline state. Once you are back at baseline, you can then use logic and strategy to solve the problem. But trying to solve a problem while spiraling is like trying to fix a car engine while it's on fire. First, you must put out the fire. Grounding is the extinguisher. The philosophy of the now, we often think that the present moment is a spiritual concept, something reserved for monks on mountaintops. But in the context of overthinking, the present is a biological sanctuary. If you look at your life right this second, not 5 minutes from now, not yesterday, are you okay? In 99% of cases, in the exact now, you are safe. You are breathing. You are supported by a chair or the ground. Overthinking is almost always about a time that isn't this time. By mastering the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, You are training your brain to recognize the safety of the present. You are teaching it that the shadows it sees in the forest of your mind are just that, shadows. As we move into the next chapters on time management and CBT, these grounding exercises will be the foundation. You cannot build a house of peace on a foundation of vibrating anxiety. You must first learn to stand still. Have you ever started your day with a to-do list that felt like a mountain, only to reach 5 p.m. and realize you spent the entire day moving pebbles at the base? You were busy. You were exhausted. You answered 40 emails, scrolled through 3 news feeds, and had a dozen quick chats. Yet, as the sun sets, that heavy, gnawing feeling in your chest remains. The big project, the one that actually matters for your future, hasn't been touched. This is a busyness trap. For the overthinker, a long list isn't just a set of tasks. It's a source of existential dread. We overthink because we cannot prioritize. We treat every incoming notification as a fire that must be extinguished, leaving our actual life goals to smolder in the background. What if you could filter your life through a lens that separated the noise from the signal? The core lesson Nick Trenton emphasizes that overthinking is often a symptom of poor mental sorting. When everything feels important, nothing is important. Our brains become paralyzed by decision fatigue. To combat this, we utilize a tool favored by world leaders and elite performers, the Eisenhower Matrix. Named after U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, this framework forces you to categorize every single task in your life into 4 distinct quadrants based on 2 criteria: urgency and importance. Quadrant 1, urgent and important, do it now. These are the crises: the burst pipe, the deadline that is due in 2 hours, the screaming child. Quadrant 2, not urgent but important, schedule it. This is a growth zone. Exercise, long-term planning, relationship building, and deep work. This is where overthinkers fail most often because these tasks don't scream for attention. Quadrant 3, urgent but not important, delegate it. These are the interruptions. Most emails, certain meetings, and other people's minor problems. Quadrant 4, not urgent and not important, eliminate it. These are the time wasters. Mindless scrolling, watching TV shows you don't even like, and productive procrastination. The entrepreneur's overload meet Aisha, a freelance graphic designer trying to scale her business. Every morning, she opens her laptop and is immediately met with a barrage of notifications. She spends 3 hours responding to potential clients who never hire her, quadrant 3. She then spends an hour tweaking the font on her own website for the 100th time, quadrant 4. By the time she gets to her actual client work, the stuff that pays the bills, she is mentally fried, quadrant 1. Aisha is overthinking her business because she is living in quadrants 3 and 4. By applying the matrix, Aisha realizes that deep design work is a quadrant 2 activity. She begins to time block her first 3 hours of the day for deep work only, turning off all notifications. She realizes that answering every DM instantly isn't good customer service. It's a distraction that prevents her from being a great designer. By categorizing her tasks, her overthinking about running out of time vanishes because she has finally spent her time on what moves the needle. The student's procrastination, Zane, is a university student with thesis due in a month. Every time he sits down to write, he thinks about the 50 sources he hasn't read yet. He gets overwhelmed and decides to clean his room to clear his head. Cleaning is a classic quadrant 4 move disguised as quadrant 1. Zane is overthinking the thesis because he hasn't broken it down. Using the matrix, he realizes that writing 500 words is a quadrant 2 task. It's important but not urgent until the night before it's due. By scheduling quadrant 2 time every day, he prevents the task from ever becoming a quadrant 1 crisis. The deep dive, the science of decision fatigue. Why does the Eisenhower matrix reduce anxiety? The answer lies in the executive function of the brain, located in the prefrontal cortex. Every time you have to decide what to do next, you use up a finite amount of mental energy. Overthinkers waste this energy by constantly reevaluating their priorities throughout the day. They ask themselves 10 times an hour, should I be doing this? Or should I be doing that? By using the matrix, You make the decision once. You create a rule-based system for your life. When you eliminate the need to constantly decide, you preserve your cognitive resources for the actual work. This is why high achievers like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg wore the same outfit every day. They wanted to eliminate frivolous decisions to save their brain power for quadrant 2. Furthermore, we must discuss the Zeigarnik effect. This is a psychological phenomenon where our brains remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. This is why your to-do list haunts you at night. Your brain is looping on the unfinished business. By placing these tasks into the Eisenhower matrix, you're giving your brain a strategic plan. Even if the task isn't finished, the brain relaxes because it knows exactly when and how the task will be handled. You are essentially closing the tabs in your mental browser. The philosophy of essentialism, overthinking, is often a byproduct of the yes trap. We say yes to every request, every social outing, and every new hobby. This spreads our mental energy so thin that we can't make a dent in anything. Nick Trenton argues that to stop overthinking, you must become an essentialist. You must realize that most things in life are noise. When you look at your life through the Eisenhower matrix, you realize that 80% of your stress comes from quadrant 3, other people's priorities, and quadrant 4, distractions. The path to mental freedom is a radical commitment to quadrant 2. This is a quadrant of prevention. When you spend time on your health, your relationships, and your long-term goals, you prevent crises, quadrant 1, from ever happening. You stop being a firefighter in your own life and start being the architect. This shift requires radical honesty. You have to admit that checking your phone isn't resting. It's quadrant 4 noise. You have to admit that perfectionism on a minor task is just a way to avoid the hard, important work. As we move forward, use the matrix not just for your work, but for your thoughts. Is this worry important? Is it urgent? If the answer is no, then it belongs in the trash bin of your mind. Imagine you are wearing a pair of sunglasses with bright blue lenses. Everywhere you look, the sky, the grass, the faces of your loved ones, everything appears blue. You might even start to believe that the world is blue. You forget that the tint isn't in the world. It's in the glass you're looking through. Overthinking is exactly like those tinted glasses. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as our cognitive distortions tell us it is. If your mental lenses are tinted with catastrophizing or personalization, every event will look like a disaster or a personal attack. What if you could take the glasses off? What if you could clean the lenses and see reality in high definition for the very first time? Nick Trenton introduces the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, as the ultimate tool for mental hygiene. CBT is based on a simple but revolutionary idea. Your thoughts create your feelings, and your feelings create your behaviors. Most people think it works the other way around, that an event, like a car accident or a breakup, causes a feeling. But CBT proves there is a middle step, the interpretation. To stop overthinking, you must learn to identify and challenge cognitive distortions. These are habitual ways of thinking that are biased and inaccurate. They are the glitches in your mental software. Some of the most common distortions for overthinkers include 1. All or nothing thinking. You see things in black and white categories. If your performance isn't perfect, you see yourself as a total failure. 2. Catastrophizing. You see a minor setback and immediately jump to the worst case scenario. A headache becomes a brain tumor. A quiet partner becomes a looming divorce. 3. Mind reading. You assume you know what others are thinking, and it's usually something negative about you. 4. Emotional reasoning. You believe that because you feel a certain way, it must be true. I feel like an idiot, therefore I must be an idiot. The performance review. Meet Liam, a software developer who just received performance review. Out of 10 points of feedback, 9 were glowing praise, and 1 was a suggestion to improve his documentation. A healthy mind would focus on the 90% success. Liam's overthinking mind, fueled by mental filtering, a cognitive distortion, ignores the praise entirely. He fixates on the one critique. He thinks, my boss thinks I'm lazy. I'm probably the next one to be laid off. Using CBT, Liam learns to catch, check, and change the thought. Catch! He notices a thought. I'm going to get fired because of my documentation. Check. He looks at the evidence. Does 90% praise usually lead to firing? No. Has he been fired before for minor critiques? No. Change. He replaces a thought with a balanced one. I am a valued employee with one specific area to improve. I will work on my documentation, but my job is secure. The unanswered text Sophia. Send a heartfelt message to a new friend. 3 hours pass without a reply. Sophia's mind-reading distortion kicks in. She thinks I'm too clingy. She's probably telling her other friends how weird I am. Her heart sinks, and she feels a wave of shame. By applying CBT, Sophia realizes she has no evidence for her mind reading. She lists alternative explanations. The friend is at work, her phone is dead, or she's driving. By broadening her perspective, Sophia's anxiety dissipates. She realizes that her feeling of being disliked was not a fact or reality. The ABC model of emotion, to truly master this, we must look at the ABC model developed by Dr. Albert Ellis, a pioneer of CBT. A. Activating event. Something happens, e.g., you lose your keys. B. Beliefs. Your internal narrative about the event, e.g., I am so stupid. I can't do anything right. C. Consequences. The emotional and behavioral result, e.g., you feel depressed and stop trying to leave the house. Overthinkers spend all their energy trying to change A, the world, or fighting C, the feeling. But the only thing you have 100% control over is B, your beliefs. When you change the belief about an event, the consequence, the stress, changes automatically. This is a secret to mental resilience. It isn't about having a perfect life where nothing goes wrong. It's about having a clean lens so that when things do go wrong, you don't turn a molehill into a mountain. The brain's limbic system is responsible for your emotional consequences. When you challenge a thought logically, you are using the prefrontal cortex to soothe the limbic system. You are essentially parenting your own brain. When your inner child screams, everything is ruined, inner adult steps in and says, actually, we just need to find keys. We are safe. The philosophy of cognitive sovereignty, most people live as reactionary beings. They are at the mercy of their environment. If the weather is good, they are happy. If someone is rude, they are miserable. CBT offers you cognitive sovereignty. It gives you the power to decide what an event means to you. Nick Trenton argues that overthinking is often just a story we tell ourselves to feel prepared for pain. But these stories are almost always fiction. By practicing the CBT thought record, writing down the situation, the feeling, the automatic thought, and the rational challenge, you begin to see patterns. You realize that you've been telling yourself the same 5 scary stories for years. And once you see the patterns, they lose their power over you. You stop being the character in the story and start being the author. Have you ever noticed that the most intense overthinking happens when you're physically still? You are sitting on the couch, lying in bed, or staring out a window, and your mind is running a marathon while your body is at a dead stop. This is because overthinking thrives in a vacuum of action. It is the spinning wheels of a car stuck in deep mud. The engine is roaring. The heat is rising, but the vehicle isn't moving an inch. Nick Trenton suggests that the ultimate antidote to the paralysis of analysis is not more thinking. It is deliberate, structured movement. When you shift your focus from why is this happening to what is the very next physical step, the mental fog begins to lift. You cannot overthink and take effective action at the exact same moment. The transition from overthinker to doer requires a framework that removes the ambiguity that feeds anxiety. That framework is the SMART goal system. Overthinkers often fail because their goals are too vague. They say, I want to be successful, or I need to get my life together. These statements are anxiety magnets because they have no finish line. You can't do them, so you just think about them. To dismantle a spiral, your objectives must be specific. Instead of get healthy, try walk for 20 minutes. Measurable. How will you know you're done? I will write 500 words, not I will work on my book. Achievable. Is this possible today? Overthinkers often set perfectionist traps that are impossible to meet, fueling more self-criticism. Relevant. Does this actually matter to your life? Or are you doing it because of social comparison? Time-bound. Every task needs a deadline. Without a when The task floats in your mind forever, taking up background RAM. The aspiring content creator consider Omar, who wants to start a YouTube channel, much like yours. Omar has spent 6 months researching cameras, analyzing the algorithm, and thinking about the perfect niche. He hasn't recorded a single second of video. His overthinking is a shield against the fear of failure. Using SMART goals, Omar stops thinking about a channel and sets a specific goal. I will record a 3-minute voiceover on my phone regarding a book summary by Thursday at 5 p.m. Suddenly, the vast, terrifying channel is reduced to a simple task. By Thursday, he has a file. He didn't have time to overthink the algorithm because he was too busy looking for a quiet room to record in. Action provided the clarity that 6 months of research could not. The financial warrior Sarah is constantly stressed about her savings. She spends hours every night looking at her bank balance and calculating how much she should have saved by now. This is pure rumination. She transitions to a SMART goal. I will automate a 5,000 PKR transfer to my investment account on the 1st of every month. By automating the action, she removes the decision point. She no longer has to think about whether she can afford it or if the market is right. The action is baked into the system. Her overthinking about her financial future stops because she has a measurable and achievable system in place. Why does action stop overthinking at a biological level? It comes down to the reward circuitry of the brain. When you are ruminating, you are stuck in a negative feedback loop. Your brain is looking for threats, finding them, even if they're imaginary, and releasing cortisol. However, when you complete a small, specific task, even something as simple as washing 3 dishes or writing 1 email, your brain releases a small pulse of dopamine. This is the achievement chemical. Dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It actually improves focus and reduces the noise in the prefrontal cortex. By breaking a large, scary goal into micro actions, you are effectively drip feeding your brain the chemicals it needs to stay calm and motivated. Furthermore, we must discuss the Zygarnik effect again, but from the perspective of closed loops. An unfinished thought is an open loop that drains your battery. A completed action is a closed loop. When you use the SMART framework, you are giving your brain permission to forget the task once it's done. You are clearing the cache of your mental computer. Nick Trenton argues that procrastination is just overthinking in a different suit. We procrastinate because the task feels too big to win. By shrinking the task until it is achievable, you remove the threat. If a task feels so scary that you start overthinking it, make it smaller. If you can't write a page, write a sentence. If you can't write a sentence, open the document. Movement, no matter how small, creates its own momentum. The philosophy of the bias toward action. In the world of high-stakes business and military operations, there is a concept called the bias toward action. It is the understanding that in a complex, shifting environment, a good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan executed never. Overthinkers are perfectionists without a product. They wait for the perfect moment, not realizing that the moment is created by the movement. As you integrate SMART goals into your life, you are shifting your identity. You are no longer someone who worries about the future. You are someone who completes tasks in the present. This shift is the core of the transformation your listeners will undergo. You aren't just changing what you do. You are changing who you are. You are moving from a passive observer of your own anxiety to an active architect of your own reality. Imagine you are sitting on the bank of a river. The water is moving swiftly, carrying with it a constant stream of debris. Fallen leaves, broken branches, and the occasional tangled knot of weeds. In this metaphor, the river is your stream of consciousness, and the debris represents your thoughts. Most overthinkers are not sitting on the bank. They are in the water, frantically grabbing at every branch, trying to stop the debris from flowing, or getting pulled underwater by a particularly heavy log of what-ifs. You are exhausted because you are trying to control the river. But what if you could just sit on the bank? What if you could watch the thoughts float by without touching them, without judging them, and without letting them pull you under? This is the essence of mindfulness. It is not about emptying the river. It is about changing your relationship to the water. Nick Trenton draws heavily from Zen philosophy to explain that overthinking is essentially a rejection of a now. When we overthink, we are mentally protesting against reality. We are saying, this shouldn't have happened, or that might go wrong. Mindfulness is a practice of radical acceptance. It is the act of being fully present in the current moment, without the filter of judgment. In the Zen tradition, there's a concept called Shoshin, or beginner's mind. It refers to having an attitude of openness and lack of preconceptions when studying a subject, even when at an advanced level. For an overthinker, this means looking at your anxiety not as a disaster, but as a curious phenomenon. Instead of saying, oh no, I'm spiraling again, you say, how interesting. My chest feels tight and my mind is producing a story about my job. I wonder where that came from. By becoming a curious observer, you disconnect the power cable from the anxiety. Core mindfulness techniques for the overthinker. 1. Focus attention. Picking a single point of focus, usually the breath, and returning to it every time the mind wanders. 2. Open monitoring. Allowing thoughts to enter the mind, acknowledging them like passing clouds, and letting them leave without engagement. 1. The body scan. Systematically moving your attention through your body to release the physical anchors of stress. 2. Mindful labeling. When a thought arises, simply label it. Thinking, worrying, planning. This prevents you from entering the thought. The commuter's rage chief spends 2 hours a day in traffic in Karachi. Every day, he overthinks his life choices. Why did I take this job? Why is this city so crowded? I'm wasting my life in this car. His blood pressure rises, and he arrives at work already depleted. Using mindfulness, Kashif changes his commute. He stops fighting the traffic in his head. He begins to focus on the sensation of his hands on the steering wheel, the sound of the engine, and the rhythm of his breath. He accepts the reality, I am in traffic. Thinking about not being in traffic does not move the car faster. By accepting the moment as it is, he saves his mental energy for his actual work. He isn't happy about the traffic, but he is no longer suffering because of it. The social comparison trap. Maya scrolls through social media and immediately begins to overthink her own progress. She sees a friend's new house and thinks, I'm 30 and I'm still renting. I've failed. Using mindful labeling, Maya catches the thought. Instead of spiraling into self-pity, she says to herself, there is a comparison thought. She doesn't argue with it. She doesn't try to think positively. She just labels it and returns her attention to the coffee she is drinking, the warmth of the mug, the steam rising. By returning to the sensory now, the toxic thought loses its fuel. To understand why Zen and mindfulness are so effective, we must look at the posterior cingulate cortex, PCC, and the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC. Together, these areas form the me-center of the brain. This is where we construct our ego, our history, and our worries about the future. Science shows that in long-term practitioners of mindfulness, the connection between these me-center areas and the rest of the brain actually weakens. When you practice mindfulness, you are physically shrinking the part of your brain that is obsessed with you. You are moving from self-referential thinking to direct experience. This is a neurological equivalent of turning off a loud, static-filled radio. Furthermore, we must address the prefrontal cortex, PFC. Mindfulness strengthens the PFC, which acts as a volume knob for the amygdala. When the amygdala screams danger, a mindful PFC can look at the situation and say, no, that's just a thought. Turn the volume down. You are building a mental muscle that allows you to choose your response to your environment rather than reacting like a puppet on strings. The philosophy of Wu Wei, effortless action. A key component of this chapter is the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or non-doing. For an overthinker, this is the hardest lesson of all. We think that if we don't do something about our thoughts, they will win. Zen teaches us the opposite. The more you fight your thoughts, the stronger they become. It is like the Chinese finger trap. The harder you pull, the tighter it gets. Only by relaxing and pushing in do you find freedom. Mindfulness is a pushing in. It is the willingness to be with your discomfort without trying to fix it. This is where true transformation happens. When you realize that you can be anxious and still be okay, that the anxiety is just a temporary weather pattern in the vast sky of your consciousness, the invisible cage begins to dissolve. You realize the cage was never locked. You were simply so focused on the bars that you forgot to look at the door. In this deep dive, we aren't asking you to become a monk. We are asking you to become the pilot of your attention. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. If you leave your attention on the debris in the river, you will drown in stress. If you move your attention to the bank of the present moment, you will find a peace that no external circumstance can take away. Have you ever tried to reason with a racing heart? Have you ever stood in front of a mirror during a panic spiral and told your brain to just be logical, only to find that your hands are still shaking and your chest still feels like it's being crushed by a hydraulic press? This is because overthinking is not just a head problem. It is a full body event. Your mind and your body are trapped in a feedback loop. Your brain sends a signal of stress, your muscles tighten in response, and then your brain senses that physical tension and concludes, we must be in danger, otherwise, why would the muscles be so tight? This creates a secondary wave of anxiety. You can't think your way out of a physiological state. But what if you could hack the system from the bottom up? What if you could use your muscles to force your brain into a state of calm? Nick Trenton moves from the software of the mind, CBT and mindfulness, to the hardware of the body. To break the cycle of overthinking, we must address the somatic symptoms of stress. We do this through two primary evidence-based techniques: progressive muscle relaxation, PMR, and autogenic training. Progressive muscle relaxation, PMR, was developed by physician Edmund Jacobson. The premise is simple. You cannot be mentally stressed while your muscles are truly, deeply relaxed. PMR involves systematically tensing and then releasing specific muscle groups. This teaches you the feeling of tension so you can recognize it earlier in your day, and it forces the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, to override the fight or flight response. Autogenic training, developed by Johannes Schultz, is a mental counterpart to PMR. It uses a series of self-statements to induce feelings of heaviness and warmth throughout the body. By telling your nervous system that your limbs are heavy and warm, you are literally tricking your brain into releasing the chemicals of relaxation. You are using the power of suggestion to regulate your own heart rate and blood flow. The step-by-step PMR process. 1. The feet. Curl your toes tightly for 5 seconds. Feel the strain. Then release instantly. Feel the blood rush back. 2. The legs. Tense your calves and thighs. Hold. Release. 3. The torso. Squeeze your abdomen and glutes. Hold. Release. 4. The hands and arms. Clench your fists as if you're holding a grudge. Release. 5. The face. Scrunch up your eyes and jaw, the place where most overthinkers hold their mental armor. Release. The jittery job interview. Zubair is a brilliant engineer, but he suffers from social freeze. Whenever he enters an interview, his jaw tightens, his shoulders hunch toward his ears, and his voice becomes thin and reedy. Because his body is in a defensive crouch, his brain feels under attack, making him forget his technical knowledge. Zubair begins practicing PMR in the waiting room, started with his toes and moving up to his thighs where no one can see. By the time he is called in, he has manually lowered his cortisol levels. His shoulders are down, his chest is open, and because his body is relaxed, his brain unlocks his memory. He isn't just acting confident. He has biologically commanded his body to be at ease. The high-pressure parent Fatima is a mother of 3 who finds herself snapping at her children. She realizes that her overthinking about the house, the bills, and the kids' future has left her in a state of constant physical tension. She feels like a coiled spring. She starts using autogenic training for 10 minutes before the kids get home from school. She sits in a chair and repeats, "My right arm is heavy, my heart is beating calm and steady, my forehead is cool." This body hacking resets her baseline. When the kids inevitably create chaos, she no longer overreacts because her nervous system isn't already at its breaking point. She has created a buffer zone of physical calm. The deep dive, the gamma-aminobutyric acid GABA. Response: why does tensing a muscle help quiet a thought? It's about the neurotransmitter GABA. GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It is the brakes of the brain. When you perform PMR, you are stimulating the nerves that signal the brain to release GABA. This chemical literally slows down the firing of neurons in the brain. Furthermore, we must look at proprioception, your brain's sense of where your body is in space. Overthinkers are debodied. They live entirely from the eyebrows up. By focusing on the heaviness of your limbs and autogenic training, you are forcing your brain to reconnect with your physical form. This somatic reentry pulls the energy away from the prefrontal cortex, the overthinking center, and distributes it back to the motor cortex and the cerebellum. When you tell your brain, "My arm is warm," you're actually causing vasodilation, the widening of blood vessels. This increases peripheral circulation, which is the exact opposite of what happens during a stress response, where blood is pulled away from the extremities to the core. You are literally reversing the physiology of fear. You aren't just relaxing, you are performing a biological U-turn. We have worked on the mind, but the body is the anchor. If the anchor is dragging in a storm, the ship will never be still. Most overthinkers treat their bodies like a taxi for their heads, just a vehicle to carry their brain from one worry to the next. Zen and Trenton teach us that the body is a temple of the now. Your thoughts can be in the past, rumination, or the future, worry, but your body can only be in the present. You cannot feel warmth in your hand 5 minutes from now. You cannot tense your toes yesterday. By anchoring your consciousness in the physical sensations of your muscles and skin, you are forcing yourself into the only time and place where overthinking cannot exist, the present. As you practice the physical hacks, you will find that your mental noise naturally lowers its volume. You are teaching your brain that it is safe. You are ending the civil war between your mind and your flesh. Once the body is still, the mind has no choice but to follow. Think of your mind as a high-security vault. In the previous chapters, we've learned how to silence the alarms and how to calm the guards. But if the vault keeps getting breached, we have to ask, where is the leak? Overthinking rarely happens in a vacuum. It isn't a random lightning strike. It is a response to a specific set of environmental keys that unlock your anxiety. Perhaps it's the way your father sighs on the phone, the specific smell of your office break room, or the feeling of dead time on a Sunday afternoon. Most of us walk through our lives blind to these triggers, allowing ourselves to be pushed into the invisible cage over and over again. But what if you could map the minefield? What if you knew exactly where the traps were laid, so you could simply walk around them? Nick Trenton argues that self-awareness is the ultimate defensive weapon. To build a lasting defense against stress, you must transition from being a reactor to being a researcher. You need to perform a trigger audit. A trigger is an external or internal stimulus that sets off an automatic, often irrational, thought loop. These triggers generally fall into 4 primary categories. 1. Environmental triggers, specific locations or sensory inputs, e.g. your messy desk, a crowded mall, or a specific song. 2. Social triggers, specific people or types of interactions, e.g. a critical boss, a competitive friend, or even passive-aggressive digital communication. 3. Physical triggers, internal states that the brain misinterprets, e.g. caffeine jitters being mistaken for anxiety, or hunger being mistaken for existential dread. 4. Temporal triggers, specific times of day or periods of the week, e.g. the Sunday scaries or the 3 p.m. energy slump. To identify these, you must use a trigger journal. For 1 week, every time you feel a vibration of overthinking start in your chest, stop and record the 4Ws. Who was I with? What was I doing? Where was I? And when did it happen? This data-driven approach strips the mystery away from your anxiety. You begin to see that you aren't just an anxious person. You are a person who reacts predictably to specific stimuli. The digital minefield meet Hassan, a freelance coder. Hassan noticed that his worst overthinking spirals, where he questioned his entire career path, always happened around 11 p.m. Through his trigger audit, he realized the key was LinkedIn. He would scroll through the success stories of former classmates right before bed. His brain would compare his behind-the-scenes struggles with their highlight reels, triggering a comparison spiral. Once the trigger was identified, the solution was tactical, not emotional. Hassan didn't need more confidence. He needed a digital boundary. He set an app limit on LinkedIn for after 8 p.m. By removing the trigger, the overthinking stopped. He didn't have to fight the thoughts because he stopped inviting them into his home. The sensory anchor Elena felt an unexplained wave of panic every time she entered her local grocery store. She assumed she had agoraphobia. However, her trigger journal revealed a surprising detail. The panic only happened in the frozen food aisle. The trigger wasn't the crowd. It was a specific hum of the industrial refrigerators combined with the harsh fluorescent lighting. This sensory overload was being interpreted by her amygdala as a threat. With this knowledge, Elena began wearing noise-canceling headphones and sunglasses while shopping. By managing the sensory input, she disarmed the trigger. She proved to her brain that the hum was just a machine, not a predator. She reclaimed her ability to run errands without a mental breakdown. The hippocampus and emotional memory. Why do these triggers have such a grip on us? It's because of the hippocampus. This is a part of the brain responsible for forming new memories and connecting them to emotions. When you experience a traumatic or highly stressful event, the hippocampus tags the environmental details, the smells, the sounds, the time of day, and files them under danger. The next time you encounter one of those details, the hippocampus alerts the amygdala, "Hey, remember this smell? Last time we smelled this, we were miserable. Fire the alarm." This happens in milliseconds, long before your rational mind can intervene. This is why overthinking feels so automatic. You are dealing with conditioned responses. However, we can use extinction learning to break these links. By identifying the trigger and then deliberately exposing yourself to it while using the grounding techniques from Chapter 2, you are teaching your hippocampus a new story. You are showing your brain, I can hear the refrigerator hum and be safe. You're overriding the old danger tag with a safety tag. This is a neurological basis for exposure therapy, and is the only way to truly defuse a trigger for good. The philosophy of protective engineering. In this deep dive, we are advocating for a philosophy of protective engineering. You wouldn't build a house in a flood zone without stilts. So why would you live your life without mental stilts? Identify your triggers allows you to pre-engineer your environment for success. If you know that hunger, physical trigger, makes you overthink your relationship, you make a rule. Never have a serious conversation on an empty stomach. If you know that messy rooms, environmental trigger your feelings of being overwhelmed, you prioritize a 5-minute tidy up as a mental health task. You aren't avoiding life. You are mastering it. The overthinker often feels like a victim of their own mind. But by mapping your triggers, you become the general of your own mental battlefield. You know where the enemy is hiding, so you are no longer surprised by the attack. You build a life that supports your peace rather than one that constantly tests your limits. As we move into the final chapters on resilience and environment design, remember, the best way to win a fight with your thoughts is to not let the fight start in the first place. Have you ever spent 3 hours drafting an email that should have taken 10 minutes? You obsess over every comma. You rewrite the second sentence 4 times, and you analyze the tone of your sign-off until the words lose all meaning. You tell yourself that you are just being thorough or that you have high standards. But let's be honest, that isn't excellence. That is fear. It is the fear that if you aren't perfect, you'll be found out as a fraud. It is the fear that a single mistake will cause the entire deck of cards to come crashing down. Perfectionism is a gold-plated cage of the overthinker. It feels like a virtue, but it is actually a lead weight that keeps you paralyzed at the starting line. While you are busy polishing the handle of the door, others are already walking through it. Nick Trenton identifies perfectionism as one of the primary fuels for chronic overthinking. For the perfectionist, there is no such thing as a small task. Everything is a test of their worth. This creates a psychological state called maladaptive perfectionism. Unlike healthy striving, which is a desire to do well, maladaptive perfectionism is driven by the desire to avoid failure at all costs. This mindset leads to a specific type of overthinking called decision paralysis. Because the perfectionist believes there is only one right choice, they spend weeks analyzing options, terrified that choosing the second best path is equivalent to failure. They end up making no choice at all, which, ironically, is the worst choice of all. To break this trap, we must move toward the philosophy of satisficing, a term coined by Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon. Satisficing is the act of searching through available alternatives until an acceptability threshold is met. It is the art of embracing the good enough, the perfectionist distortions. 1. The all-or-nothing yardstick. If the project isn't 10 out of 10, it's a 0 out of 10. There is no middle ground. 2. The should statements. I should be further ahead by now, or I should never make mistakes. 3. The magnification of errors. A tiny typo in a 50-page report feels like a stain on your entire reputation. The unfinished masterpiece Zainab is a talented artist who has been working on a single painting for 2 years. She has repainted the eyes of her subject dozens of times. Every time she gets close to finishing, she finds a flaw that no one else can see, and she starts over. Zainab thinks she is dedicated to her craft. In reality, she is overthinking the painting to avoid the vulnerability of showing it to the world. By applying the 80-20 rule, Zainab learns that 80% of the painting's impact comes from the first 20% of the work. The remaining 80% of her time is spent on diminishing returns. She sets a SMART goal. From chapter 5, she must finish the painting by Friday. Flaws and all. The moment she signs her name to a good enough piece, the overthinking vanishes. She realizes that a finished painting that is an 8 out of 10 is infinitely more valuable than a perfect painting that never leaves her studio. The micromanaging executive Raza is a manager who refuses to delegate tasks because he's convinced no one can do them as perfectly as he can. Consequently, he is working 80 hours a week and is on the verge of a burnout-induced breakdown. His mind is a chaotic mess of minor details. Raza undergoes imperfection training. He deliberately delegates a minor task and forces himself not to check the work until it's submitted. He discovers that even if the work is only 90% as good as his own, the company doesn't go bankrupt. The world keeps spinning. By embracing good enough from his team, Raza reclaims 20 hours of his week and silences the overthinking that was destroying his health. The law of diminishing intent and the prefrontal cortex. Why does perfectionism feel so safe? It's because it's a defense mechanism of the prefrontal cortex. When we overanalyze a task, we feel like we are protecting ourselves from the social pain of rejection. However, this creates a state of cognitive overload. Your brain can only hold about 7 chunks of information in its working memory at once. When you try to be perfect, you are trying to hold 70. This causes the brain to glitch, leading to the very mistakes you are trying to avoid. Furthermore, we must look at self-compassion as a neurological regulator. Science shows that when we criticize ourselves for an imperfection, we activate the same part of the brain that responds to physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex. This self-pain triggers the amygdala, which triggers more overthinking. Conversely, when we practice strategic imperfection, deliberately allowing for small mistakes, we build emotional resilience. You are teaching your brain that mistake does not equal death. You are desensitizing your nervous system to the horror of being human. This is why many therapists suggest a coffee shop exercise. Go to a cafe and deliberately order something wrong or make a tiny social blunder. You'll find that no one cares. The philosophy of done is better than perfect in the world of software development. There's a concept called the minimum viable product, MVP. You don't wait for the perfect software. You release the version that works and you iterate. This should be the overthinker's mantra. Your life is not a final exam. It is a series of iterations. Perfectionism is rooted in the belief that your worth is tied to your output. If the output is perfect, you are worthy. If the output is flawed, you are flawed. Nick Trenton challenges this at its core. You are worthy because you are a conscious being capable of growth. Growth requires mistakes. If you aren't making mistakes, you aren't growing. You are just polishing the cage. As you move forward, look for opportunities to be strategically messy. Send the email without reading it for the 5th time. Post a video even if the lighting isn't studio quality. Speak up in the meeting even if your sentence isn't perfectly phrased. You'll find that the good enough version of your life is far more vibrant, productive, and peaceful than the perfect version you've been trapped in. The goal isn't to be a perfect machine. It is to be a functional, happy human. Have you ever walked away from a party, a date, or a simple meeting at the office and spent the entire drive home conducting a post-game analysis of every syllable you uttered. You replay the moment you stumbled over a word. You obsess over the slight raising of an eyebrow from your boss. You convince yourself that the silence following your joke wasn't just a lull in conversation, but profound, collective realization that you are socially inept. This is the spotlight effect. It is the paralyzing belief that everyone around you is observing your every move with a magnifying glass, when in reality, they are just as busy worrying about their own magnifying glasses. You are trapped in a prison of other people's perceived opinions. Opinions that, in most cases, don't even exist. Nick Trenton identifies social overthinking as one of the most draining forms of mental exhaustion because it involves mind reading, a cognitive distortion where we assume we know what others are thinking without any objective evidence. In social settings, the overthinker is playing a high-stakes game of chess against a ghost. You aren't reacting to the person in front of you. You are reacting to the version of that person you created in your head. To navigate relationships without stress, we must dismantle the social approval loop. This loop is a survival mechanism. In our tribal past, being disliked by the group meant being cast out, which meant death. Today, your brain interprets a rejected text message or a lukewarm reaction to your ideas as a life-threatening event. To break this, we use two primary psychological shifts: the 18-40-60 rule and external focus. 1. The 18-40-60 rule. At age 18, you care about what everyone thinks of you. At 40, you stop caring what people think of you. At 60, you realize they were never thinking about you in the first place. 2. External focus. The overt shift. Instead of monitoring your own heart rate and choosing your next words, you shift 100% of your attention to the other person. You become an active listener rather than a self-performer. The ghosted friend Arif sent a message to his close friend asking to hang out on Friday. His friend saw the message but didn't reply for 2 days. Arif's mind immediately went into investigation mode. He scrolled through their previous texts to see if he said something offensive. He convinced himself the friend was moving on to a more successful social circle. He felt a deep sense of social anxiety and considered blocking the friend to save face. Using the evidence check from Chapter 4, Arif stopped the spiral. He asked, "Do I have proof he is mad?" "No." "Has he been busy with work lately?" "Yes." When the friend finally replied, he said, "Sorry, bro, my kid got sick and I've been at the hospital." Arif's 2 days of overthinking were not only useless, they created unnecessary resentment toward a friend who actually needed support. By realizing he wasn't the center of his friend's weekend, Arif found peace. The meeting blunder. Sanaa gave a presentation at work. During the Q&A, she didn't know the answer to one technical question and said, "I'll have to get back to you on that." For the rest of the day, she overthought that one sentence. She thought, "They think I'm a fraud. They're probably talking about my lack of knowledge in the break room." Sanaa used the spotlight reset. She realized that out of a 30-minute presentation, she spent 29 minutes being highly competent. She forced herself to think about the last time a colleague didn't know an answer. She realized she didn't think less of them. In fact, she barely remembered it happened. By applying the same grace to herself that she gave to others, she realized the spotlight was actually a dim bulb. No one was talking about her. They were all worried about their own upcoming deadlines. The mirror neuron system and social buffering. Why is social overthinking so loud in our heads? It involves the mirror neuron system. These are specialized brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. They allow us to feel empathy and read social cues. In overthinkers, the system is overclocked. You are so sensitive to the micro expressions of others that you begin to project meaning onto every blink and twitch. Furthermore, social overthinking activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, DACC, the same part of the brain that processes physical pain. Social rejection literally hurts. However, there is a biological antidote called social buffering. When we have deep, authentic connections, our brain releases oxytocin, which acts as a natural anxiety eraser. The irony is that overthinking prevents this buffering. When you are performing in a social setting, you aren't being authentic. You are wearing a mask. Because you're wearing a mask, you can't truly connect, so you don't get the oxytocin hit, which makes you more anxious, which makes you overthink more. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. To stop the cycle, you must be willing to be socially imperfect. Vulnerability, the willingness to say, I don't know, or I'm feeling a bit nervous, is actually the fastest way to build a trust that silences the overthinking brain. The philosophy of cognitive humility, social overthinking, is, in a strange way, an act of arrogance. You are assuming you are so important that everyone is constantly thinking about you. You are assuming you have the psychic power to know the contents of someone else's mind. Cognitive humility is the acceptance that you cannot know what people think, and therefore, it is a waste of time to try. Nick Trenton teaches that the goal of social interaction is not approval, but contribution. When you enter a room asking, do they like me? You are an overthinker when you enter a room asking, how can I add value to this conversation? You are a leader. Shifting from self-validation to external contribution is the master key to social freedom. As you move through your day, remember that most people are the hero of their own movie. In their movie, you are a supporting character who appears for a few scenes. They aren't dissecting your performance. They are worried about their own script. Relax your shoulders. Let go of the need to be the most liked person in the room and aim to be the most present person in the room. The silence that follows a joke isn't a judgment. It's just a breath. Let it be. Imagine a grand, ancient oak tree standing in the middle of a windswept plain. Over its 100-year life, it has endured blistering droughts, freezing winters, and violent summer storms that snap the branches of younger, weaker trees. Why does the oak survive? It isn't because the wind stops blowing. It's because the tree has spent its life digging its roots deep into the earth and developing a trunk that is both strong and flexible. Most overthinkers are like saplings. At the first sign of a mental storm, a piece of bad news, a harsh critique, or a sudden change in plans, they are nearly uprooted. They spend all their energy trying to stop the wind. But true mental toughness isn't about stopping the wind. It's about becoming the oak. It is the ability to maintain your core stability even when the world around you is in chaos. Nick Trenton argues that the ultimate goal of overcoming overthinking is not just peace, but resilience. Resilience is a psychological immune system that allows you to bounce back from adversity without falling into a week-long spiral of rumination. To build this toughness, we move into the realm of stoicism and stress inoculation. Mental toughness is built on the foundation of the internal locus of control. Overthinkers often have an external locus. They believe their happiness is dictated by their boss, their partner, or the economy. Resilience comes from flipping that script. You must accept that while you cannot control the events of your life, you have absolute sovereignty over your response. The pillars of mental toughness. 1. Stoic acceptance, recognizing the dichotomy of control, knowing what is yours to change and what must be endured. 2. Cognitive reframing, viewing obstacles not as threats but as training data. 3. Stress inoculation, deliberately exposing yourself to small discomforts to build your tolerance for larger ones. 4. The so what method, confronting the worst case scenario head on until it loses its emotional charge. The canceled launch Hamza is an entrepreneur who spent 6 months preparing for a product launch. On the day of the release, the payment gateway crashed, and he lost 40% of his projected sales. A sapling version of Hamza would have spent the next month overthinking. I'm a failure. The universe is against me. I should just quit. Instead, Hamza uses stoic acceptance. He asks, can I control the server crash? No. Can I control the apology email I send to customers right now? Yes. He shifts his energy from why did this happen to what is the next right move? By focusing on action, he builds mental toughness. He realizes that a crisis is just a high-pressure environment to test his systems. He becomes anti-fragile. He actually gets stronger because of the disruption. The health scare Layla receives a call from her doctor saying she needs further testing after a routine checkup. The overthinking brain immediately jumps to stage 4 cancer and begins planning her own funeral. This is the catastrophizing loop. Layla uses the so what method. She forces herself to follow the thought to the end. If it's bad news, what then? She realizes she would seek treatment. She would lean on her family. And she would fight. By acknowledging that she could handle even the worst case, the unknown loses its power to paralyze her. She returns to the present moment, realizing that today, she is still healthy and breathing. She refuses to suffer twice, once in her mind and once in reality. The neurobiology of stress inoculation. How do we physically build toughness? It involves the prefrontal cortex, PFC, and the periaqueductal gray, PAG. The PAG is a primitive part of the brain that triggers the freeze response, that paralyzed feeling you get when you're overwhelmed. In overthinkers, the PAG is hyperreactive. Stress inoculation training, SIT, works by creating controlled stress. When you deliberately do things that make you uncomfortable, like taking a cold shower, speaking in public, or waking up early to exercise, you're training your PFC to stay online during a stress spike. You are teaching your brain that a high cortisol state does not mean game over. Over time, the neural pathway between the PFC and the amygdala becomes like a thick, reinforced cable. When a real-life crisis hits, your brain has muscle memory. It says, I've felt this stress before in a cold shower and I didn't die. I can stay calm and solve this. You are physically increasing your vagal tone, which allows your heart rate to recover faster after shock. Mental toughness is not the absence of fear. It is a neurological ability to act in spite of it. The philosophy of a more fatty love of fate. A central theme of Nick Trenton's approach to resilience is the stoic concept of a more fatty. This is a radical idea that you shouldn't just tolerate your challenges. You should embrace them as necessary for your growth. Every overthinking spiral you've ever had was a weightlifting session for your mind. Every mistake was a lesson in what not to do. When you stop seeing life as something that happens to you and start seeing it as something that happens for you, the overthinking stops. Why? Because you no longer fear bad outcomes. If you believe that you can find value in any outcome, even failure, then there is nothing left to obsessively worry about. You are free to move. Building mental toughness is the final step in moving out of the invisible cage. You are no longer trying to hide from life. You are stepping out into it with your head held high, knowing that whatever the wind brings, your roots are deep enough to hold. You have moved from why me to try me. Have you ever tried to concentrate on a complex task while sitting in a room with a buzzing fly, a flickering light, and a pile of dirty laundry on the chair next to you? Even if you have the mental discipline of a monk, a portion of your brain is constantly tracking that external chaos. Most overthinkers believe their anxiety is purely internal, a glitch in their soul, or a defect in their personality. But the truth is much simpler. Your mind is a mirror of your environment. If you live in a space defined by clutter, digital noise, and unfinished business, your internal world will reflect that fragmentation. You aren't failing at being calm. You are simply living in a space designed for stress. What if you stopped trying to fix your brain and started fixing the room your brain lives in? Nick Trenton argues that the invisible cage of overthinking is often constructed from the objects and habits in our physical and digital surroundings. This is the concept of environmental priming. Your brain is constantly picking up cues from your environment that tell it how to feel. A messy desk primes the brain for overwhelmed thoughts. A phone that pings every 30 seconds primes the brain for hypervigilance. To silence the mind, we must engage in environmental engineering. This involves a radical audit of your physical space, your digital habits, and your sensory diet. We move from a reactive environment to a proactive one. By designing a space that promotes low cognitive load, you give your prefrontal cortex a rest. You stop the visual noise from triggering the mental noise. The pillars of environmental design. 1. The one-touch rule. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, like hanging up a coat or filing a paper, do it immediately. This prevents the visual debt that fuels overthinking. 2. Digital minimalism. Your phone is the number one source of artificial overthinking. We must move from infinite scroll to intentional interaction. 3. The sanctuary concept, designating specific zones in your home where worry is strictly forbidden, most importantly, the bedroom. 4. Sensory optimization. using lighting, sound, white noise/lo-fi, and even sent a signal to the amygdala that it is time to power down. The Zoom fatigue specialist Kieran is a remote worker who conducts her entire professional life from her kitchen table. She eats where she works. She works where she eats, and she scrolls on her phone in the same spot at night. Kieran finds herself overthinking her job even on Sundays. She feels like she can never escape. By applying environmental engineering, Kieran creates contextual boundaries. She buys a small desk and places it in a corner. She makes a rule: work only happens at the desk. The kitchen table is for food and family. When she steps away from the desk, she is physically leaving the job. By separating the space, she separates the thoughts. Her brain learns to associate the kitchen table with safety and the desk with focus. The Sunday scaries vanish because the job now has a physical home that isn't her entire life. The digital overload Adnan checks his news feed the moment he wakes up. Before he has even brushed his teeth, he is overthinking global politics, the economy, and his friend vacation photos. He is starting his day in a reactive state. Adnan implements a digital sunset and digital sunrise. He buys an analog alarm clock and charges his phone in the kitchen. He doesn't touch his phone until he's finished his morning coffee and written his SMART goals for the day. By controlling his first input, he controls his first thought. He realizes that his morning anxiety wasn't who he was. It was just a reaction to the 50 notifications he was inviting into his bed. The neuroscience of visual complexity. Why does a messy room make us overthink? It involves the ventral visual pathway of the brain. When you look at a cluttered room, your brain has to perform a saliency audit. It has to identify every object, assess its importance, and decide whether to ignore it or act on it. This uses a massive amount of glucose, the brain's fuel. When your environment is complex and cluttered, your brain is in a state of constant processing. This leaves less energy for the executive function needed to manage your emotions. This is why people in cluttered environments often have higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. You are literally exhausting your brain just by looking around. Furthermore, we must discuss dopamine loops in the digital world. Every ping, or new headline is a variable reward that triggers a dopamine spike. Overthinkers are often dopamine junkies without knowing it. They keep scrolling because their brain is searching for a solution to their anxiety. But the scroll only provides more noise. By cleaning your digital environment, unsubscribing from negative channels, and turning off non-human notifications, you are performing a dopamine detox. You are allowing your brain's baseline to return to normal, which naturally reduces the vibration of overthinking. The philosophy of the external mind in philosophy. There's a concept called the extended mind. It suggests that our minds are not just in our heads, but are integrated into the tools and environments we use. If your external mind, your office, your phone, your schedule, is a mess, your internal mind has no choice but to be a mess as well. Nick Trenton teaches that cleaning your room is an act of cognitive behavioral therapy. You aren't just picking up socks. You are ordering your thoughts. You are telling yourself, I am in control of my reality. I am choosing peace over chaos. Environmental design is the ultimate act of self-respect. It is a physical manifestation of the mental boundaries we've been building throughout this book. As you finish this chapter, look around you. Ask yourself, does this object add to my peace or my noise? If it's noise, get rid of it. If it's a notification you don't need, silence it. You have spent 11 chapters building the mental muscle to fight overthinking. Now build a home that doesn't require you to fight so hard. Let your environment do the heavy lifting for you. Think back to the very first moment we began this journey. We stood at the edge of a dark, suffocating forest, trapped in an invisible cage of our own making. At that time, the bars felt solid. The anxiety felt like a permanent part of your DNA. And the noise in your head was so loud you could barely hear your own heartbeat. You were a passenger in a vehicle being driven by a panicked, ancient version of yourself. An amygdala that saw tigers in every shadow and disaster in every silence. But look at where you are standing now. The forest has thinned. The bars of that cage haven't just been unlocked. They have been revealed for what they always were. Illusions built from habit, biological glitches, and a lack of tools. You are no longer the victim of the storm. You have become the sky. The synthesis of mental freedom over the course of these 15,000 words, we have dismantled the architecture of overthinking from every possible angle. We didn't just wish for peace, we engineered it. We began by understanding the anatomy of anxiety, realizing that our brains were simply running outdated survival software. We learned that the grounding of the 5-4-3-2-1 technique could act as a biological emergency brake, dragging us out of the mental whirlpool and back into the safety of the physical world. We moved into the tactical realm with the Eisenhower matrix, learning to separate the noise from the signal so that our time is spent on growth, not just firefighting. We performed mental surgery using CBT essentials, identifying the cognitive distortions, the tinted glasses that were coloring our reality with fear. We learned to catch, check, and change our thoughts until we achieved cognitive sovereignty. Then, we bridged the gap between the mind and the world. We replaced rumination with SMART action, proving that movement is the ultimate cure for paralysis. We embraced the Zen of mindfulness, learning to sit on the bank of the river and watch our thoughts float by without being pulled under. We used progressive muscle relaxation to hack our nervous systems from the bottom up, and we mapped our triggers to ensure we never walk blindly into a minefield again. Finally, we released the heavy weight of perfectionism, designed our environment for peace, and built the mental toughness of an oak tree. The final transformation imagined the new you. It is a Tuesday morning. You receive an email that would have previously sent you into a 3-day spiral. You notice the vibration of anxiety starting in your chest. But instead of entering the cage, you pause. You ground. You feel the weight of your feet on the floor. You audit. You label the thought. That is catastrophizing. Asterisk, you categorize. You place the task in quadrant 2 of your matrix. You act. You take one SMART step forward. The anxiety doesn't disappear instantly, but it no longer controls you. It is just a weather pattern. You have achieved the transformation. You are now a person who lives in the doing mode rather than the worrying mode. You have reclaimed the thousands of hours that were previously stolen by what-ifs. You have unlocked a level of creativity, energy, and presence that you thought was lost forever. The permanent shift in neurobiology, what has actually happened inside your skull? Through the power of neuroplasticity, you have physically weakened the worry trench in your brain. Every time you use a technique from this audiobook, you are long-term potentiating a new, healthier pathway. You have increased your vagal tone, meaning your body can return to a state of calm much faster than before. You have shrunk the functional connectivity of the me center, the DMN, and strengthened the executive center, the PFC. This isn't a temporary high or a fleeting moment of inspiration. You have changed your biological baseline. You are now stress inoculated. Just as a muscle grows stronger after being torn, your mind has become more resilient because you have faced the shadows and learned to shine a light on them. The invisible cage cannot reform as long as you continue to use the tools. You aren't just overcoming overthinking. You are evolving beyond it. The philosophy of the infinite horizon in this final deep dive, we must address the ultimate truth. Life will never be perfect. There will always be challenges, losses, and uncertainties. The world will always provide reasons to overthink. But the transformation is the realization that your peace is not dependent on the world being quiet. Your peace is dependent on your ability to be the master of the noise. Nick Trenton philosophy is a call to radical responsibility. You are the architect of your internal landscape. You have the power to decide which thoughts to feed and which to starve. You have the power to design a life that serves your spirit rather than one that drains it. The infinite horizon is a life that waits for you when you stop looking at the bars and start looking at the sky. I want you to take one final, deep breath. Feel the air fill your lungs. Feel the life in your limbs. You have done the hard work. You have faced the most difficult enemy of all, your own mind, and you have emerged victorious. The invisible cage is gone. The forest is behind you. The path ahead is clear. And for the first time in a long time, you are the one choosing where to step. Stop overthinking.